you think the average American buys into the claims made by those that would delegitimize Israel? Or do they realize it's just largely unsubstantiated propaganda?
Well, as much as I had hoped to give a yes or no answer, it's not really possible. 5 years ago, I spoke at the Herzliya conference, and I spoke about the poisoning of the elites and the danger of delegitimization. And for many in the audience, Israelis and foreigners, it was as if I was talking about Mars. That is not the case today. I think that there's a growing recognition that there is, and I believe, unlike the UN, it is a coordinated effort. I do believe that we can see the patterns that were true in Europe being true here in the United States. If you go back to the report of the House of Commons in December, I think 2007, done by 3 non-Jewish members, that is the blueprint for the United States, where they talked about the poisoning atmosphere on campuses. They talked about the predecessors to Walter Mearsheimer and to this global campaign. I think that Naomi's right, and I think Professor Dershowitz, I don't think it's a distinction. I think both are problems that we have to confront. The first thing is coming to an understanding. Delegitimization is not only impossible to pronounce, nobody knows what it means. So we have to begin to come to understand that this is not about 67. It's not about settlements, and all the time wasted this morning talking about settlements. That's not the issue in people's minds. Americans don't really care. We demonized the settlers. It became an issue, a roadblock in political sense. But the fact is, this is about 47. This is about Israel's right to exist. They want to delegitimize Israel in the same way, and I was at the March of the Living last week in Warsaw, and it came to me that this is the form that the Nazis used to dehumanize Jews. This is to delegitimize Jews, but you go after the corporate Jew, the collective Jew, the state of Israel, because you can't say 70 years after the Shoah, at least not in all places, that I hate Jews, but you can't say I hate Israel. And what we have to look at is history teaches us that it's not what our enemies do, it's what we fail to do. It's that we raise the bar on what we will tolerate. That Pat Buchanan can speak on national television about Jews being a fifth column, and we don't tear down the stations. It's our fault, not his. If Walter Mearsheimer can get away on campus after campus and have their book used, 1 million copies sold from Harvard to University of California, it's our fault. All the alumni, all the faculty, everybody should be being mobilized about this. For too long, we were really tolerating. We keep raising the bar and raising the bar until all of a sudden we say, where did this come from? The answer is, it's we who helped create it. Martin Luther King said, we won't be judged by the attacks of our enemy, but by the silence of our friends. And we too often accept that people can get away with it, that people can talk about us in these terms. Understand, when they talk about Israel, they mean us. They mean the Jewish people. But the way you hurt the Jewish people is to say that Israel doesn't have the right to defend its citizens like every other country. Israel doesn't have a right to be a member in the UN. When islands with 60,000 members, their membership isn't challenged in the UN. And we have taken steps. I just take 1 minute to say that we've created the Strategic Communication Center where we are trying to get into the 21st century. The Jewish community, despite the fact that we control all the media, as they say, we are in the 18th century when it comes to using electronic media. We have to be there where the young people are. The truth is that the vast majority of the American people support Israel in record numbers. But as broad as it is, that's how thin it is. And we dare not take it for granted. Not our friends in the evangelical communities, not our friends in any other community, and especially our youth. We've taken them for granted too long. It's not just in high school. In elementary school, we got to start teaching them. That's why the Catholic Church says, give me a kid till he's 6, you can have him the rest of their lives. So we've created the Leadership Action Network. In 6 months, 4 million people, half of them non-Jews, have signed up to speak out and to act on Israel. We created the Lawfare Project to mobilize lawyers around the country, and Allan has been helpful on it, to be able to fight these attempts. They're permeating every sector of society, unions, churches, legal groups, entertainment, and the boycott efforts. And we have to be there on every one of those fronts. We can't excuse any of them, and hold people to account and expose them when they won't stand with us and they won't tell the truth for us, and they keep demonizing Israel and the Jewish people. We can counter it. And we also did one more thing, and that's called America's Voices in Israel, where we are taking now movie stars, Hispanic leaders, black leaders, the top movie stars, and everybody said you'll never penetrate Hollywood. We have this week 11 top stars going to Israel, blacks, Hispanics, and whites. Everybody lining up, more and more now want to go because they see the truth. And there's nothing that sells Israel better than Israel itself. So the answer to this challenge, which is so vital. And unfortunately today, we saw how mischievous things is when a guy makes a reference to Germany on this platform, and then it can be manipulated. Everybody says, listen, what are you talking about? Here's a government official drawing the analogy. So Israelis have to be much careful. Allan is right. We have to be able to go after Israelis and not say you have a license to come here and say whatever you want just because you have the title Israeli. You have to be held to account just as every other person who speaks against the Jewish people or against the Jewish state. No more tolerating it. Zero tolerance.
Thank you, Malcolm.
The problem is that the Friends Seminary in New York invites Gilad Atzmon to talk to their students. The problem is that Professors Walt and Mearsheimer endorse Atzmon's book. The problem is that Richard Falk, the former UN rapporteur on Palestine, says Atzmon's book is a book that should be read and widely discussed by everybody. Now, you know, I'm not young. I've lived through a lot of horrors in the world. Let me tell you that in the worst days of South African real apartheid, there was never this kind of attack on South Africa as we're seeing on Israel. It wasn't even close. In Stalin's worst days, we never saw that kind of attack. In the 1930s, I'm not old enough to remember this, but I've read about it. In the 1930s, with the buildup of fascism in both Italy and Germany, we never saw this kind of irrational attack. My friend Phyllis Chesler has a wonderful phrase for it. She calls it almost eroticized hatred. And I have to tell you, I've stood face to face with some of these folks. They believe it. They really think we're worse than the Nazis. They really think we are the worst people on the face of the earth. They really think that Israel supporters, I had people chanting at a speech recently, Dershowitz, Goebbels, just the same, the only difference is the name. That kind of thing that you hear, but it's the movement from extremism, off the charts, things that would be ignored, to becoming accepted by the mainstream. It is absolutely crucial that we must distinguish between our friends who we disagree with and our real enemies. We should not be focusing on CNN. We should not even be focusing on Peter Beinart. We should not be focusing on friends who make mistakes. We should be focusing on people who genuinely believe that the falsification of history is proper, that calling the best the worst is proper, that focusing on Israel's flaws, and there are flaws, every country has flaws, but exaggerating to the point of making them Nazi-like, that is beginning to filter down into young students on the campus. And that's where we really have to draw the battle lines. We have to know the difference between our friends who we disagree with, people who might be somewhat biased, and those who genuinely seek to use the media to destroy Israel. It's only the latter that pose a national security threat to Israel, so we must get our priorities straight.
Thank you, Professor Dershowitz.